The Linux Foundation is corrupt, and Linus Torvalds knows it. Now, this is in continuation of my last video. A lot of people are like, well, what does the user space have to do with the Linux kernel? And that's a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because actually this was exactly what I was actually going to talk about today. Had this planned a while back. Hey, I'm a software engineer. And guess what? I guess they just let anyone use this moniker. Anyway, I've been using open source for like 30 years. I'm pretty well versed in this stuff, so you can either listen to me and get the real story, or listen to some of these other pudwhackers. I don't really care. Alright, back to the video. Let's start off with the story you probably already know. In 1991, a Finnish computer scientist student named Linus Torvalds posted a message to a Usernet group that would change the world. He was building a free operating system kernel. Just a hobby, he said. Won't be big and professional like GNU. Thousands of developers from around the world started contributing, voluntarily, for free, out of idealism, curiosity, and a genuine belief that software should be free. This is the founding myth, and like most myths, it contains real truth wrapped inside a structure that serves the powerful. Because here's what the myth glosses over. As most of you already know, Linus didn't build Linux. He built the kernel. Thousands of engineers who contributed the other 90% of the work, the device drivers, the file system code, the networking stack, the security modules, most of them never saw a dime from the Linux Foundation. Many of them were volunteers. And let's just be real, most of those volunteers eventually got jobs at corporations who were using their free labor as a resume screening tool. Think about that structure for a minute. A kid submits a kernel patch for free, corporation notices his skill set, hires him, and then the same corporation pays him to continue contributing to the same project, which they now influence through their membership fees to the Linux Foundation. The volunteer phase didn't disappear, it just moved inside the payroll of companies like Red Hat, Intel, and Google. More on that later. The Linux Foundation was created in 2007, officially. When the open source development labs and the free standards group merged, its stated mission to foster growth of sustainable open source ecosystems. Notable, admirable even, but let's look at what it actually does. The foundation is registered with the IRS as a 501c6, not a charitable nonprofit, but a business league. The same designation used by chambers of commerce and trade associations. Its legal obligation is to its members and not to the public, not to the community of developers who actually write the code. And who are those members, you might be asking? Platinum members pay up to $500,000 a year in dues. We're talking Microsoft, Google, IBM, Intel, Oracle. Companies with a direct financial interest in the direction of the Linux kernel. In exchange for that $500,000, they get board representation. Companies whose code Linus Torvalds reviews, whose patches he accepts or rejects, are the same companies paying the salary of the organization that employs him. Here's the moment that tells you everything about what the Linux Foundation actually values. Individual community members used to be able to pay $99 a year for membership. In exchange, they got something valuable, the right to elect 2 board members, real representation, and a real voice. That changed. The individual membership program was quietly renamed to the Individual Supporter Program. The board election rights completely stripped away. No community vote, no public debate, just gone. Now, the timing here is not a coincidence. At the exact moment this happened, Karen Sandler, the executive director of the Software Freedom Conservancy, was campaigning for a seat on the Linux Foundation board. The Conservancy was the organization actively suing VMware for GPL violations. VMware was a Linux Foundation Platinum member. So the Linux Foundation didn't just remove community representation, they removed it right as the one person most likely to actually push for GPL enforcement was about to win a seat. Make of that what you will, it could just be a coincidence. The GNU General Public License, the GPL, is a legal foundation of Linux. It's not a suggestion. It's a contract under which every single line of kernel code was contributed. It essentially says, if you use this code, you have to share your modifications. You can't take the community's work, wrap it in your own product, and sell it without giving something back. More specifically, you cannot place additional restrictions on what recipients can or cannot do with the source code you're required to give them. That's the deal. The entire ideological foundation of free software rests on the deal being honored. Red Hat, one of the Linux Foundation's biggest platinum members, now owned by IBM, literally broke it openly. Here's what happened. In June of 2023, Red Hat announced they were terminating public access to Red Hat's source code. Going forward, the only way to get the source code for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, a product built entirely on GPL licensed software, would be required to pay for a Red Hat subscription. But it gets worse. When you subscribe and access that source code, you are required to agree to Red Hat's terms of service. And those terms explicitly prohibit you from redistributing the source code to anyone else. The GPL says you must provide source code to anyone who receives your binary. Red Hat is saying, fine, here's the source, but if you share it, we'll terminate your subscription and sue you. That is an additional restriction on the redistribution of GPL code, which the GPL explicitly forbids. This isn't a technicality. This is not a gray area. This is Red Hat, a company built entirely on Linux, has made billions of dollars from GPL license code written in the beginning by volunteers and later by paid engineers across the entire community using contractual NDA language to gut the downstream rights that the GPL was specifically designed to protect. Now, the entire reason projects like CentOS, Alma Linux, and Rocky Linux could exist was because the GPL guaranteed anyone the right to take Red Hat Linux source and build a compatible distribution. That's not a loophole, that's the point. The GPL made it possible for hospitals, universities, small businesses, and governments around the world to run enterprise Linux without paying Red Hat subscription prices. Well, I guess Red Hat just killed that, didn't they? Deliberately, and framed it as a business decision. Now, the response from the Linux Foundation, whose platinum membership Red Hat holds, whose board Red Hat employees sit on, which employs Linus Torvalds, was complete silence. Not a statement, not a legal challenge, not even a blog post questioning whether this violated the spirit of the license governing their own flagship project. Now, compare that to what happened when the Software Freedom Conservancy, a small nonprofit, actually tried to enforce a GPL against VMware, another foundation member, caught distributing Linux kernel code inside their proprietary ESXi hypervisor without providing source. The Conservancy filed a legitimate, well-documented lawsuit. Christoph Hellwig's copyright was being directly violated. The Linux Foundation's response to that case, quote, "Oh, we hope the parties can still pursue a cooperative process," a cooperative process with a company that had been violating the GPL for years, quite literally. And Linus Torvalds, well, he didn't call out VMware. He called out the enforcers. He called out the Software Freedom Conservancy, and I'm quoting directly here, Typhoid Mary spreading a disease. He said lawsuits destroy community. And I don't entirely disagree with that idea. His own second in command, Greg Crow Hartman, made the philosophy explicit. You value the GPL over Linux. I value Linux over the GPL. This numbskull doesn't understand that without the GPL, you don't have Linux. Read it any way you want. But the number 2 person in the Linux kernel development told you out loud that the legal instrument protecting your rights as a user of Linux is less important than the commercial ecosystem built on top of it. And that commercial ecosystem, as we have established, is controlled by the same corporations paying $500,000 a year for board seats at the Linux Foundation. After the VMware lawsuit, corporate donors pulled their funding from the Conservancy. The message was received throughout the industry. Enforce the GPL, lose your friends. Violate openly, get a seat on the board. The GPL is not dead, but its enforcement mechanism has been systematically dismantled by the very organization that claims to steward it. Pull back and look at the full picture of who controls the Linux desktop ecosystem. Red Hat, now owned by IBM, which paid $34 billion for the acquisition, is the largest contributor to GNOME. They created System D, the init system that now runs on virtually every major Linux distribution. They created Wayland, the display server replacing X11. They created Pulse Audio, and they maintain Network Manager, among a whole bunch of other things, right? All of those projects live on the freedesktop.org, an organization that was founded by a Red Hat developer in the year 2000 and has been entangled with Red Hat's interests ever since. freedesktop.org calls itself a volunteer organization, and technically, the organization has no payroll. But the people doing the actual coding, they're paid employees of Red Hat, Intel, Google, Valve, and AMD, among other companies. The volunteer label is an organizational fiction that serves a real purpose. It gives corporate technical agendas the branding of community consensus. And when a developer named Enrico Weigelt challenged us by working on the X Libre fork, a community attempt to continue X11 development out of Red Hat's control, Red Hat employees on the freedesktop.org admin team banned him from the infrastructure entirely, deleted his account, closed his merge request, and mocked him on social media. This was the same playbook that killed X-Free86 20 years ago. Here's where we need to be fair to Linus Torvalds, because there's a version of this story where he's simply a brilliant engineer who got caught up in something bigger than himself. Think about someone like Patrick Bet-David, someone who built their success on a structure where the people at the top captured most of the value, while the people who did the foundational work largely did it for the promise of future opportunity. It's not illegal. It's arguably not even immoral, depending on how you look at it. But it's important to be clear-eyed about the structure. Linus created a kernel. He set up a meritocracy. He'll take your patch. If it's good, he'll reject it. If it's bad, he'll tell you exactly why in language that you can't repeat on television. This part is very real. But the structure grew around that meritocracy, well, that's a different story altogether. Thousands of volunteer contributors gave their nights and weekends to Linux in the late 90s and early 2000s. Some of them got jobs out of it. I would say even most of them did. Meanwhile, at the top of the structure, Linus receives nearly $1.6 million a year from an organization funded by those same corporations. He received stock options from Red Hat and VA Linux, companies whose patches he was reviewing during the dot-com boom, and briefly seeing his paper net worth hit $20 million. He's never had to publicly justify any of this because he's protected by the mythology. Because if you question Linus, you're questioning Linux itself, and frankly, who wants to do that? Here's a pattern worth noting. Whenever political or government pressure arrives at the Linux Foundation's door, the meritocracy disappears fast. In October of 2024, the Linux Foundation quietly removed roughly a dozen Russian kernel maintainers from the maintainers file. The stated reason? Various compliance requirements. No public policy was announced. No letter from the US government was ever produced. The decision appears to be preemptive. The Foundation acting on its own initiative to get ahead of the political sanctions exposure rather than responding to an actual legal directive. And don't get me wrong, I still support this decision overall. But I do think they could have literally handled this so much better. And when the community pushed back asking for clarity, Linus Torvalds dismissed the criticism by attributing it to Russian troll factories. Let's be precise about what happened. A group of engineers who had contributed real legitimate code to the Linux kernel lost their maintainer status, not because of anything they did wrong technically, not because their code was bad, not because they violated any rules, but because of their nationality. There's a certain perception that goes along with this. It's not meritocracy. It's a corporation making a political decision and using the kernel mailing list to execute it. And the man with the final authority went along with it and insulted anyone who objected. So where does that leave us exactly? I mean, Linux is genuinely one of the greatest collective technical achievements in human history, and certainly one of the biggest achievements of my lifetime. I mean, come on. The code works, runs the world. Thousands of engineers are both paid and unpaid, pour their best work into it, and the result has changed everything. So let's just take Red Hat for a minute, okay? The issue with Red Hat, and I've been thinking about this for a while. Is it totally unreasonable, for them not to expect that their source code is left alone, that only the people who are subscribers to their operating system and their services are the ones that get to see that source code, and the other people, mainly Rocky, Alma, and CentOS, are the ones left out in the dark, that they don't get access to that source code? I mean, is it that unreasonable when you take a look at the simple fact that they release so much source code to so many different vital projects? Is it that unreasonable? And is it that unreasonable that they get a pass for this? So, and when the Linux Foundation gives a pass to some of this, is that corruption akin to something like Microsoft or Apple? I mean, is there enough money to make the Linux Foundation or anything in the Linux world anything close to being comparable to the monolith, giant, whatever that is, Microsoft or Apple, and the corruption that obviously goes along with it? We need to take a look at this like a red flag or a set of red flags and say these things are either damning coincidences or they're about to do something that is a deal breaker for me. And I'm getting pretty close to that point, but I'm not there yet. I'm not about to jump on FreeBSD quite yet, or OpenBSD or NetBSD or whatever BSD flavor. I'm not quite there, but I am messing around with BSD because when that day comes, I'm going to be ready for it. I suggest you do the same. So what do you guys think? Is this fair? Let me know in the comments section below. And as always, I just want to thank my pithy members right over here. And if you want to check out my last video of why I think the Linux kernel might eventually get forked, you can check that out right over there. Later, nerds.